For those passionate ceramicists, if there's people that make short videos about what didn't work, they're really valuable because somebody else might see, yeah, well, it didn't work because of this, but hey, I have this in my shop, and it just can inspire new ideas or possible collaborations. Hi, this is Michael Joy. Welcome back to Hand-ufacturing. We are on a little bit of a walkabout with this gentleman named Kurt at Hammerly Ceramics. The first video that I just watched was the first time ever I've seen a ceramics 3D printer. I had some thoughts about that. And the thought today is I'm curious how he's going to deal with surface treatment, because now he's got to take a rather generic looking printed piece and make it pretty. And it's funny because in the housing industry where they're printing houses, they're trying to solve this same issue, is how do I deal with the poo-poo texture that's left? So let's see how he's addressing things.
Hey everyone, I'm Kurt from Hammerly Ceramics. Last week we printed a bunch of these planters on my PotterBot Clay 3D printer, and this week we are going to be attaching the feet to the bodies, and then we're going to work on some finishing techniques to kind of get rid of these 3D printing lines and make it more of a finished product. This isn't a necessity, but for what I want to make, I really think it's going to be important to give these outside surfaces a different texture for glazes and just to look a little different. I personally think that the 3D printed clay look is a little overdone, and I really never think of 3D printed pieces as a final product. I always think that there's more that you need to do to do something interesting with them. So,
high five.
First thing we're going to do is I am going to take these 4 feet and attach them to this planter.
I'm going to see if we can get through that fast.
I'm not going to leave that 3D printed texture bare because I'm going to process it so much. These connections need to be cleaned up a little bit, but it's not a huge issue if they don't look perfect. And then once I'm done cleaning this up, I'm going to move on to this more narrow and tall planter and do the same thing, and I'll show you guys a different angle of that. So this really helped remove some excess material, smoothed it out.
Now I jumped ahead because it's pretty basic stuff. He attached the feet, which he explained very clearly, and now he's in the design part of the brain, which is, what can I do to make this look different? And at the moment, it looks like a construction technique, you know, tile grout or something. Let's see how his brain handles this.
It out to conform to the curves of the piece a little bit more. It's not the texture that I want in the final piece, but it definitely was a good step along the way. I'm wondering if I just wait for it to firm up a little bit.
So this is the part that YouTube allows that didn't used to be allowed in the past because time was too valuable. In the past, it wasn't really easy to show the development of an idea. You know, you hear that story about Thomas Edison, and he took thousands of times to discover to test which filament worked in the light bulb. And the number is what people listen to. But here you're seeing a guy actually develop an idea here, and we don't know how much time is in between. You know, I know if I ask someone here in the office, and they're in the middle of another project, and I ask them to go think differently on something else, it's not a smooth transition. And so if this guy's Kurt's not leaving himself enough time, he's got to think about it right in front of the camera, and it's kind of like a behind-the-scenes moment.
And then go at it with a wet sponge to kind of smooth it out.
But
it's
at the part where you can't judge because it's not there, and he knows it's not there. So we'll share the love.
This is serving its purpose. I'm spending some time simply experimenting, simply playing with new ideas before I get back to making stuff, my normal work.
See? Oh, there we go.
I'm gonna have to think about this.
Okay, fair enough.
Probably gonna let it dry a little bit and then come back to it. There will always be this kind of finishing component by hand through whatever techniques that I decide I really want to go forward with.
Yeah. This is, in my mind, when a person should be looking outside of their industry. This is how I got into the culinary field, is I met a pastry chef at a glass blowing studio. What was the chef doing at the glass blowing studio? Well, he was looking for techniques associated with glass blowing that if his glass blowing skills got better, he could use them for sugar working, because glass and sugar, there's many, many overlaps in technique. So I thought he was really smart to crossing tribal lines, so to speak. And I think that this is where a guy like Kurt should be looking at various other influences outside of the ceramics department to really sort of kick him into some thought process. Because right now, in my mind, he's just looking around what's in his shop, not what is in another shop. If he came to my shop and he saw the laser, he'd be like, oh, let me cut some stencils, and I'll put some stencils on here and then smear over them and take them off. And other things would just be immediate. But when you're in your own house for too long, things become invisible.
I'm gonna stop there for now.
He's not happy.
It's definitely covered up the texture.
Even the music is like, I don't have it yet, you know.
So I'm gonna let it firm up on the surface a little bit. We'll probably
I've so
switch
been
back
here.
to the smaller one, depending on how dry it is, and see.
So I used to do some design work for some large industrial global companies, and the way we would start is, one is they weren't going to necessarily take my idea. I had to take their idea, and sometimes they would only give me 1 or 2 words. One company gave me 2 words and said, modern allure. And they're like, it has to suit every country in the world because we sell food in every country. I was like, oh shit. And basically, the whole premise starts with looking on the internet for something that is contrary to what they already sell in design sense. And then I took those opposing or complementary forces, and then I took them back before I went too far in the design. And I said, what are you guys vibing with here? And then out of 50 things, they chose 10, and then I went with those 10 and expanded those things. So I wasn't fighting them along the way. They were participating in the decision. This is the difference between a commission and a self-made work of art. But if he has already done some research and come at this with intention, that's one approach for creativity. Some people just don't work that way. Some people just want to like, have a baby right there. So this is what's happening with him. His head is the library. It's not some book. It's not the internet.
What we want to do with that one next. So we're back to the smaller one. It is
but you see,
still very soft.
He's kind of sidestepping.
So I think I'm going to wrap these up in plastic and let them sit overnight. I am getting ready to do the very last of these big 3D printed pieces with the surface texture on. This one was done by hand, and it's looking pretty good. I'm happy with it, but I want to try.
These are very aquatic designs to me.
With the spray gun, so I'm going to show you guys that. I did something a little different this time. So I have my slip prepared to spray out of that spray gun, and I'll go over how exactly I do this in a different video, but it's the same clay that's used for the 3D printing. It's just deflocculated with Darvan and sodium silicate. And then
what it sounds like is, although he said he would get into it in another video, if you over defloculate your casting slip, it becomes kind of thick, and it's there's some niceness to that. However, Darvan I only worked with once. I think it was just invented when I was in the ceramics department, and then I graduated. But we had an artist come in, and the way she handled casting slip when she wanted it to be more thixotropic was she would add a little bit of Epsom salt, and you'd mix that Epsom salt in, and it would whip it up like marshmallow. And then she would take that like a baker, and she'd put it in a pastry bag, and the pastry bags have tips for cake decorating. And then what that meant is she could use clay through a clay decorator without having to exert great pressure, because it just flowed right out. And she had all these texturing options, and she could then bring the chef world and her design skills to the pieces. And I think that it's because there's a lot of things going on here that's like frosting a cake.
This time I've actually mixed in these nylon fibers that I got for reinforcing concrete.
So those will cause some trouble. It interferes with shrinkage. One of the things that was really nice to do with casting slip is we did put in organic material, like you could throw in popcorn or these little Rice Krispie things, and they would, let me say it a different way. Here's a neat way to get a texture. You take a sponge, an organic sponge that breathes nicely. You dip it in casting slip, and you let it dry, and you burn it out. And the organic material burns out, and then you're left with the exoskeleton of the sponge afterwards. And this is the same as integrating organic materials into casting slip, is when you fire them, they burn out and they leave negative impressions or voids where they were, but it's not easy to control. The sponge thing was really cool though.
I blended them up in a food processor so they would be a lot more fine.
Yeah.
But these fibers are going to go into that slip, and then when I spray it onto the surface of this piece, it's hopefully going to give it just a little bit more reinforcement as it dries, so cracks are less likely to appear, and the surface texture is going to actually...
When you spray a wet over a dry, they don't work well, because one, the dry clay is already shrunk and the wet clay has not shrunk, and there's the weight of the wet clay, but also the wet clay will shrink and then it will damage the dry clay below, and it weakens it at the same time. It's a dodgy technique.
Stay on, so we'll see what happens with that. Let's do the spraying now. Here we are outside in my spray booth. This is my drywall texture gun that I use to spray the slip onto the pieces with. Behind me,
what I'm happy about is that he's already looking outside of his studio in this respect. Literally, he's outside, smart. But he's looking at construction techniques. I wonder if he was in the building industry before. And the construction technique, if you implement those tools, there may be something that translates into ceramics. We had some very world champion level bread bakers, and they were winning these international competitions because one of them, Cyril Hitt, he was a very skilled ceramicist. And what did he do? He took all these ceramic techniques and brought them into bread dough baking and all sorts of things, and he could build these beautiful sculptures. And the other bakers who were like making muffins were like, what the hell did this guy just build a Ferrari? It was incredible. So mixing industrial techniques and tools is a ticket to really, really great inspiration. I'm going to fast forward through this.
Piece on a banding wheel, centered and ready to go.
Let's see what happens.
So we're just going to take, all the slip is adhering. It's
okay.
Not dripping down significantly. So now we will dry it as slow as possible and see how it works. So I spent the last week and a half
it didn't work.
Coming up with techniques to additively reduce the texture from the 3D printer, and it's been an interesting experience. I have some that work really great and some that don't work so great, but there's a lot more testing to do. So
Always.
We did a couple different things. The first thing was to use my drywall texture gun that was full of thickened slip to spray.
You can watch his video for this stuff. I want to get to the, let's see where he's...
A bunch of these were actually finished by hand. So I took the pieces out of the printer, and while they're still leather hard, I mixed up a batch of slip and I applied it with my hands in a couple layers, and then just smoothed it out and gave it kind of a surface texture that looks really handmade. And in most cases, I'm really happy with that texture, and it's going to be great for glazing. It is
okay, I get it.
Another part.
There we go.
And I really like this. This result is fantastic. I love this glaze
So
on the planter.
let me stop right here.
Really...
I've seen enough in a good way, not like I've run out of my daily time, but a couple things. One is, by the time he glazes this, it's about the glaze, not the piece. If you think about the price point of a planter, competing with other planters, so it's never like, hey, this planter is this much, it's not some Ming Dynasty thing, but his glazes are going to determine the success of those shapes. And what I like is when a shape and a glaze are beautifully aligned, like his brain coral mugs, those really were complementary of the texture. This, to me, doesn't look like it would have mattered whether it was molded or 3D printed, other than maybe a skill set in the shop. He had somebody running a printer, or it was getting done while he was not there. The other thing is I like that for those passionate ceramicists, if there's people that make short videos about what didn't work, they're really valuable, because somebody else might see, yeah, well, it didn't work because of this, but hey, I have this in my shop, and it just can inspire new ideas or are possible collaborations. But I think that not a lot of people have the balls enough to share the journey. Again, I compare it to the culinary world a lot. We had some really high-level executive chefs in the kitchen, and they were, because there's like military rule in the kitchen, you know, there's like ranks of people, it's this weird organization, and the ego structures match. And so what would happen is you could have, not all instances, but some instances, a very amazing chef, leader, producer, but they were afraid to experiment in front of their staff because they didn't want their staff to see them fail. It was a weird ego structure, but sometimes the chefs were aware of it and sometimes they were not aware of it, and they wouldn't allow themselves to be bold. I think just the opposite is what's golden, is when someone takes a chance to take a risk in front of somebody, even though it might not work. It's not like he's risking flying a plane he doesn't know how to fly. He's just messing around with clay. But this community aspect, what YouTube provides, I think is extremely valuable. So for this matter, I really like what he's doing. I'm not sold on the shapes, but I'm into different shapes, you know, someone votes me down on that stuff as well, but I always vote this guy up, and sometimes I'm about the process and usually not about the person, but I like this guy as a teacher, as a facilitator of information, and I think probably a lot of people are going to be inspired by his failures. I mean, that sounds funny, but you know, so Mold Maker high five to Kurt again. Thank you for watching.